In Houston, Texas, there are two kinds of power. The kind you build with your hands, and the kind you inherit when you marry the man who already built it. T.C. Collins had the first kind. He had built the Houston Rattlesnakes from a struggling mid-table franchise into the most feared team in the conference. Over 20 years of the most ruthless ownership in the league. He had the trophies. He had the relationships. He had the governor's number saved in his phone, and the governor had his. Ariel Collins had the second kind. She had married into it. She managed the team's branding with a brilliance that TC acknowledged the way a man acknowledges the weather. Aware of it, dependent on it, entirely uninterested in discussing it. And Jabari Davis had neither kind of power yet. He was one season away from the contract that would change his family's life forever. He had the talent. He had the record. He had done everything T.C. Collins had ever asked of him. What he did not have was the signature. And in the space between Jabari's performance and T.C.'s pen, Ariel Collins found her opening. Welcome to corporate chaos scandals, the place for the most shocking and unbelievable workplace confession stories. From office drama to hidden secrets, nothing's off limits. Before we get into this, make sure you subscribe and like, because we bring you stories like this every week. T.C. Collins was 61 years old, the kind of man that Houston produced in its specific, particular way. Wide-shouldered, direct, the particular confidence of someone who had never been in a room where he wasn't the most powerful person, and had long since stopped noticing this as a condition rather than a permanent feature of existence. He had grown up in the oil business, made his first significant money at 32 in a deal that his partners described as either visionary or reckless, depending on whether they were talking about it before or after it succeeded, and had parlayed that money into a series of acquisitions that had eventually, at 41, included the purchase of the Houston Rattlesnakes at a price that the sporting press had called excessive, and that had turned out to be, with 20 years of hindsight, the best investment T.C. Collins ever made. He had turned the Rattlesnakes into something, not just a winning team. He had made them a brand, a civic institution, a piece of Houston's identity in the way that the best franchises become pieces of their cities. He had made decisions that the analysts questioned and that had consistently, over 2 decades, been correct. He trusted his instincts with the specific self-assurance of a man whose instincts had a 20-year track record of being right. And he did not particularly care whether the people around him agreed with the decisions before they were made, because the results had always arrived to vindicate him after. He managed his players the way he managed everything, with a combination of genuine warmth and total authority that made the warmth feel like a gift he could withdraw at any moment. He told Jabari Davis that he was like a son to him. He meant this in the specific and limited way that T.C. Collins meant the personal things he said, not as an empty phrase, but as a real feeling that existed alongside and did not contradict the fact that Jabari was also an asset whose value T.C. was managing with the same calculation he applied to everything else. The contract negotiation was the version of this that had been running for 18 months. Jabari had had his best 2 seasons, his completion percentage, his rushing yards, his fourth quarter performance under pressure. The numbers were the numbers, and the numbers were extraordinary. His agent had submitted a contract proposal that was, by any reasonable market assessment, a fair reflection of what Jabari's performance justified. TC had been negotiating against this proposal with the patience and the leverage of a man who knew that the other party needed the deal more than he did, and who intended to use that knowledge until the last possible moment. He had told Jabari in the meeting that opened this story that the extension would be signed after the playoffs, not as a negotiating tactic. He had said this with the warmth of a man delivering good news. After the playoffs, it was coming. Jabari just needed to get through the season. He had then left the room to take a call from the governor, because T.C. Collins took calls from the governor, and the call was not going to wait. And Ariel stayed. Ariel Collins was 43 years old. She had met T.C. at a charitable function in Houston 18 years ago. She had been there representing a design agency she was working for at the time. He had been there as a donor. He had pursued her with the single-minded efficiency he applied to acquisitions. She had been attracted to the certainty of him, which is a quality that is very compelling at 25 and becomes more complicated to assess with time and proximity. She had built the Rattlesnakes brand. This is not a small thing in professional sports, and it was not small in Houston specifically, where the team's identity was as much a product of how it presented itself as of what it did on the field. The visual identity, the community engagement strategy, the sponsorship relationships, the media presence, all of it had been shaped by Ariel over 18 years, developed from a franchise that had adequate branding to one whose brand was studied by other organizations in the league. TC acknowledged this the way he acknowledged things that were working, by not changing them. He did not say this was insufficient. He did not think of it as insufficient. He was a man for whom results spoke, and Ariel's results spoke clearly. What he did not do, and what had been the fault line running through 18 years of marriage, was see the work as hers. He saw it as the team's. He saw it as an extension of the Rattlesnakes organization. He did not, in the accounting he kept of the things that belonged to whom, place Ariel's contribution in the column that had her name on it. Ariel had spent 18 years watching this and had developed, in response to it, the specific restlessness of a brilliant person whose contribution is structural and invisible and unattributed, and who is running out of energy for the patience required to keep performing within those constraints. She was not a woman who acted without thought. Everything she did was considered. The consideration just did not always produce the outcome that caution would have recommended. When TC left the room and Jabari was still sitting at the desk with a glass of celebratory bourbon in his hand and the contract extension that wasn't yet signed in a folder in front of him, Ariel stayed. She moved to the desk. She picked up the marketing materials that were the stated pretext for her presence at this meeting, and she began talking to Jabari Davis in a way that was different from how she had talked to him in the previous 3 years of his tenure with the Rattlesnakes. She said, "TC sees a player. I see a man who has been carrying this entire city on his back for 2 seasons and who deserves more than being told to wait." She was not wrong about this. That was the specific danger of what Ariel Collins said and did. She was perceptive, and she was articulate, and the things she said were frequently true. Jabari was carrying the team. He did deserve more than being told to wait. These were accurate observations. The check she placed on the desk as she left the room was from her personal account, not the team's, not TC's business accounts, hers. The account that was hers and had been hers for 18 years, because Ariel Collins was a woman who had, whatever else she had done, kept her own money separate. The amount was significant, enough to be meaningful, small enough to be deniable as a professional courtesy if challenged. It was accompanied by a note that said, in her precise handwriting, "For everything you give that doesn't show up in the statistics." She left the office. Jabari sat at T.C. Collins' desk in T.C. Collins' office and looked at the check and understood that something had just happened that he had not agreed to and had not refused, and that the space between those two things was where the problem lived. He should have called his agent. He knew this. He knew it the way you know the thing you should do that you don't do, because the thing you should do requires a conversation you're not ready to have. He was 27 years old. He had grown up in Dallas, the second of 4 children. His father, a high school football coach who had driven him to practice every morning for 10 years, and who was the person Jabari thought of when he thought about the contract extension, as the person whose life it would most change. His father's knees were bad. His mother worked. His siblings were in school. The contract extension was not just for Jabari. He put the check in his inside jacket pocket. He told himself he would deal with it when he understood what it was. He did not cash it. This is important. He never cashed the check, but he kept it, which was its own kind of decision, and the keeping of it was the thread that would eventually pull when everything else started to move. The relationship between Ariel and Jabari developed over the following 3 months in the way that these situations develop when they are not addressed at the point where they should be, incrementally through a series of individually small steps, each of which was deniable in isolation, and which accumulated without any single dramatic moment of decision into something that could not be characterized as anything other than what it was. Meetings that were nominally about branding that went longer than branding required. Text messages that were professional in their language and personal in their subtext. A dinner once that was attended by other team staff and that Jabari understood and that Ariel understood to be something other than what it appeared. He was not in this account a passive participant. He was a grown man who made choices. What is also true is that the dynamic between a 27-year-old player whose career-defining contract extension required the signature of the man whose wife was the other party to this situation was not a dynamic between equals. The power geometry of what Ariel had constructed, the check, the attention, the implication that her relationship with TC gave her influence over outcomes that mattered to Jabari, was not subtle. It was precise. She had built the Rattlesnakes brand for 18 years. She understood leverage. TC Collins did not notice. He was managing a playoff run. He was on calls with the governor. He was doing the things that TC Collins did. Ariel had for 18 years operated in spaces that TC did not fully attend to. This was one of them. It was the team's head of security who first raised a flag. His name was Roland Briggs, 22 years with the franchise, a man whose job was to notice things that other people missed and who had across 2 decades developed an institutional knowledge of the Rattlesnakes organization that rivaled TC's own. He had seen patterns of behavior that concerned him over the previous 6 weeks. He had not made assumptions. He had documented. He brought what he had to TC's chief of staff rather than to TC directly, because Roland Briggs was experienced enough to know that this kind of information delivered to the wrong person in the wrong moment created problems rather than solving them. His chief of staff was a woman named Sandra Park, who had worked with TC for 11 years, and whose job required her to be the person TC could trust with things he could not deal with in public. Sandra brought it to TC on a Tuesday morning. She sat across from him in his office, the same office, and she put the documentation on the desk. She said, "I need you to look at these. I need you to look at them before I say anything." TC looked at them. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "How long have you known?" Sandra said, "Roland came to me on Friday. I spent the weekend deciding how to bring it to you," TC said. "And Jabari," Sandra said. Roland's assessment is that the initiation was not his. That doesn't absolve him of his choices in what followed, but the record suggests the situation was constructed around him rather than by him. TC looked at the documents for a while longer. Then he looked out the window at the Houston skyline that his money had, in small and large ways, helped to build. He said, "Get me my lawyer." What followed operated on 3 tracks simultaneously. The legal track, which involved TC's attorneys, and moved with the speed and discretion of a man whose resources allowed for both. The marital track, which involved conversations between TC and Ariel that TC conducted in private, and that he has never, in any account since, described in detail. And the professional track, which involved Jabari Davis, his agent, and the specific, tense, carefully managed conversation about a situation that had the potential to end a career at its most consequential moment. TC met with Jabari directly. The two of them, no attorneys, no agents, in the same office where this had all started. TC said, in a voice that the account of the meeting described as quieter than anyone had expected from him, "I know what happened. I know the shape of it. I know more about the shape of it than I'm going to say in this room. What I need to know from you is this. Was there a single moment where you had a choice and you made the right one?" Jabari thought about the check in his jacket pocket. He had kept it for 3 months. He had never cashed it. He had kept it because he had not known what to do with it, and keeping it had felt wrongly like it was different from using it. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He placed the check on the desk in front of TC Collins. He said, "I never cashed it. I should have called my agent the day she put it there. I didn't. That was wrong. That was my wrong to own, but I never cashed it, and I never let it go further than it went, and I have spent 3 months knowing I needed to be in this room having this conversation." TC looked at the check. He looked at Jabari for a long time. He said, "Your contract extension will be signed on Monday. We'll announce it after practice." Jabari said, "Sir." TC said, "You came in here and you told me the truth, and you gave me back the check. That tells me what I need to know about who you are. What I do with everything else is my business to deal with. He stood up. He extended his hand. Jabari shook it. TC and Ariel separated 6 weeks later. The announcement was 2 sentences issued through TC's press office. The divorce proceedings were handled with the resources that T.C. Collins brought to everything he did, and quietly, comprehensively, and with a speed that reflected the legal capabilities available to the second wealthiest franchise owner in the conference. Ariel did not contest the process. She had her own attorneys. She had her own account. She had, across 18 years, built enough of her own professional standing that she did not exit the marriage as someone who needed TC's infrastructure to function. She consulted for a competing franchise within 8 months of the separation. The work was excellent, as her work had always been. Jabari Davis signed his contract extension on a Monday morning, announced after practice exactly as TC had said. The press conference was attended by 37 journalists and was, by the account of the Rattlesnakes communications team, the most positively received announcement they had managed in 6 years. Jabari's father was in the front row. He was wearing a Rattlesnakes jacket that someone had given him at the door. When Jabari held up the signed contract for the cameras, his father put his hands together once, a single quiet clap, and then sat very still with the expression of a man who had driven his son to practice every morning for 10 years and who was feeling, in this moment, the weight of all of it. The Rattlesnakes made the playoffs. They went 3 rounds. They lost in the conference championship by 4 points on a fourth-quarter decision that Jabari has said in every account since was the correct call in the situation and that he would make again. T.C. Collins still runs the Rattlesnakes. He's 61 years old, and he has no visible intention of stepping back from anything. The governor still has his number. He still takes the call. Roland Briggs is still head of security. He has not been given a bonus specifically for what he documented and brought to Sandra Park. He has received, since that Tuesday morning, every resource he has requested, approved without question every time. He understands this as the equivalent. That is the story of T.C. Collins, Ariel, and Jabari Davis. The contract that wasn't signed, the check that was never cashed, and the Tuesday morning when a head of security put a folder on a desk and changed the ending. Drop a comment below. Where does your judgment land in this one? T.C., Ariel, Jabari? Because this is a story where everyone in the room made choices and the choices were not all equal. And I want to hear your full assessment. This is what the comments section was built for. And if you are not subscribed to Corporate Chaos Scandals, hit that button right now. Like this video. Share it. We are here every single week with the stories that come straight from the intersection of power, ambition, and the moments where people show you exactly who they are. I'll see you in the next one.